I had always known that I wasn't the favorite. But knowing it and feeling it in every corner of my life were two different things. My older brother, Jake, was the golden child, the pride of the family, the one who could do no wrong. My parents, Linda and Tom, showered him with admiration, bending over backward to support him. His wife, Emily, and their two perfect little kids. And me? I was Ethan, the afterthought, the one they called only when they needed something. It started subtly, like a slow burn, a series of small, seemingly innocent requests. Ethan, sweetheart, can you help with the electricity bill this month? Your dad and I are a little tight on money. Mom had asked one evening, her voice soft, tinged with a forced sadness that made me feel guilty for even hesitating. I had just started my first real job, barely settled into the rhythm of paying my own bills, but I nodded and helped. Then came the next request. Ethan, honey, your brother is in a bit of a bind. She sighed over the phone, her voice layered with expectation. Emma needs braces, and it's so expensive. I wouldn't ask, but I know you're doing well. The words stung, not because of what she said, but because of what she left unsaid. It was never a request, it was a demand disguised as love. It wasn't, can you help? It was, you will help. Because you always do. And so I did. Month after month, year after year, I helped cover unexpected repairs, school fees, car trouble, medical bills, every financial storm they faced. My parents never struggled, not really, because they always had me as their safety net. Whenever they came up short, all they had to do was pick up the phone and I would be there. Wallet open, no questions asked. And the worst part? They acted like I was the lucky one. You don't have all these responsibilities like Jake does. Mom would remind me with a pitying smile. You have so much freedom. That's what they called it. They made it sound like a gift, like I had been spared some terrible fate of marriage and children. But I wasn't free, I was bound by obligation. Trapped in a role I never chose. They weren't helping me because I didn't need it. I didn't need it because I had spent my entire life making sure I never would. Jake, on the other hand, lived recklessly, knowing that no matter what happened, someone would catch him. If he and Emily overspent, if they maxed out their credit cards, if they took on more than they could handle. They didn't worry, because Mom and Dad would bail them out. And when Mom and Dad couldn't, they turned to me, and I let it happen. I told myself it was fine, it's family. After all, I told myself I didn't mind, I wasn't struggling. I told myself I wasn't bitter, but the bitterness was always there, lurking beneath the surface. For years, I had accepted this unspoken agreement that I was the provider and Jake was the one who received. My entire existence had been shaped around helping them, supporting them, fixing their problems while my own wants and needs were brushed aside as unimportant. And then, one day, I made a mistake. I dared to dream for myself. I had spent years saving for my dream trip to Japan, carefully setting aside money, researching flights, planning itineraries. It was the one thing I wanted, just once. Something for me. I didn't tell them, because deep down, I knew what would happen. I knew there would be another emergency, another crisis, another excuse to push my plans aside so I could help them. So I booked the trip in secret, paid for every cent myself, and told no one. For once, I was going to do something without their permission. For once, I was going to put myself first. And for the first time in my life, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to break free. But fate had other plans. There are moments in life when everything changes in an instant, when a single second stretches into eternity, leaving behind a wound that never quite heals. That moment for me happened at Los Angeles International Airport, standing in the economy boarding line, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and exhaustion. For the first time in my life, I was about to do something just for me. I had worked hard for this. Every dollar, every hour of overtime, every sacrifice had led to this moment, my dream trip to Japan. I had booked it in secret, refusing to give my family the chance to guilt me out of it. This was supposed to be my escape, my rebellion against years of being the forgotten son, the family's walking wallet. And then, in an instant, my entire world tilted. Oliver, put your backpack down. Bud, you don't need all that stuff. That voice. I turned my head, and my stomach dropped. There they were, Jake, Emily, their 2 kids, and my parents, standing in the priority boarding line. First class. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. They were struggling. They couldn't afford a vacation. They had told me that over and over again. That was why they had needed my help. And yet here they were, laughing, relaxed, wearing matching travel outfits like something out of a damn commercial. A lump formed in my throat. But I forced myself to breathe. Maybe they saved up for this. Maybe it was some kind of miracle. Then I heard my mother laugh. I still feel bad we couldn't take Ethan, she said, shaking her head. Jake snorted. Please, Mom, he wouldn't have fit in. They laughed. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't about the vacation, or the plane tickets, or the endless bills they had asked me to cover. It was about what I meant to them. Nothing. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to look away. I could have said something. I could have walked over. Could have called them out right then and there. Could have watched their faces crumble in guilt and panic. But I didn't, because in that moment, I realized something even worse. They wouldn't have cared. I wasn't part of their world. I was just the one who made their world easier. I boarded my flight without saying a word. I didn't call. I didn't text. For the first time in my life, I let the silence sit. Usually, I was the one checking in, making sure they were okay, asking if they needed anything, the one offering help before they even had to ask. Not this time, and for the first time, it felt good. My trip to Japan was everything I had dreamed of. I walked through ancient shrines, drank sake in hidden alley bars, stood at the base of Mount Fuji with the wind in my hair. Knowing that I had made this happen for myself, I should have been happy. And I was. But at night, when I sat on my hotel balcony, watching the city lights flicker, the laughter at the airport haunted me. He wouldn't have fit in. Over and over, those words played in my head. It wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. I wasn't their priority. I wasn't even an afterthought. And when my plane landed back in LA a week later, I knew one thing for sure, I was done. The moment my plane touched down in Los Angeles, I knew something had changed. It wasn't just the jet lag or the exhaustion from hours of travel, it was me. Something inside me had hardened, solidified into something unmovable. I had walked through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, stood before the towering gates of Kyoto's shrines, tasted the richness of matcha in a quiet tea house, and for the first time in my life, I had felt free, not just because I was thousands of miles away from home, but because I had finally done something without my family's permission. And yet, as I turned my phone back on, the past came crashing down. A dozen missed calls, a flood of unread messages. Mom, Dad, Jake, their voices, their demands, their expectations, all waiting for me like a storm ready to strike. I didn't respond, not at first. I went home, threw my bags on the floor, and let the silence stretch between us for as long as I could. But then, the next morning, my phone rang again. I stared at the screen. Mom. I could have ignored it. But some part of me, the part that had spent my whole life caving in, giving in, fixing things, still felt the pull. So I answered. Oh, sweetheart, she gushed, her voice too bright, too cheerful, like she was trying to cover something up. How was your trip? I didn't take the bait. It was great, I said flatly. A pause, a hesitation, and then the real reason for her call. Listen, your dad and I were wondering if you could help out this month, just a little extra for groceries. You know how things are. I let the silence stretch. And then, without thinking, I laughed. Sharp, bitter, cold. Groceries? I repeated, like the ones you bought on your way back from first class? Silence. The kind that crackles like ice breaking apart. Ethan, she said, suddenly defensive. That was different. We had some airline miles saved up. And Jake found a great deal. Don't. I cut her off. My voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it before. Sweetheart, it's not what you think. You could have invited me, I said, my voice like steel. But you didn't. You didn't even think about it. And now you expect me to keep helping you? I could hear the way she struggled for a response. The gears in her mind turning, searching for a way to twist the conversation, to make me feel guilty like she always had. But not this time. This time, I was done. 2 days later, Jake called. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. "Oh, so now you're too good to pick up your phone?" he snapped the second I said hello. I smirked. First class must have really spoiled him. "What do you want, Jake?" "Oh my God, Ethan, are you seriously mad about that?" "Grow up." "I am growing up," I said. "That's why I'm done taking care of you." A pause. Then, his voice softened into that fake, manipulative charm he always used when he wanted something. "Come on, man. You know how hard things are for us. You don't have kids. You don't have real expenses, it's different for you." There it was. The same excuse. The same entitlement wrapped in a plea. "Right," I said. "And yet, I still paid for Oliver's soccer fees last month." A beat of silence. Then, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, Jake said, "Well, yeah, because you always do." Like it was my job. Like I owed him. "Not anymore," I said simply. The pause was longer this time, stretching between us like a chasm that had always been there, but I had never dared to see. And then he laughed, cold, mocking. "Wow, you're actually serious. Dead serious. You're such a selfish little..." Click. I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. For the first time in years, I was silent. No texts. No calls. No last-minute bailouts. I simply existed outside of their world. And the silence, my silence, was deafening. At first, my family didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they thought I was just throwing a tantrum. That I would come crawling back the moment they needed something. After all, I always did. But this time, I didn't. And that's when the panic set in. It started small. Missed calls. Messages left unread. A few guilt-ridden texts from my mother. Each one more desperate than the last. "Mom, Ethan, I don't know what's gotten into you. But this is not okay. We're family. Families help each other. Dad. Son. Stop being dramatic. You know Jake and the kids need your help. Just be reasonable. Jake. Are you actually ignoring Mom and Dad? Wow, you really think you're better than us now?" Each message was more predictable than the last. Like a script they had rehearsed 100 times. The same manipulation. The same guilt trips. The same expectations. But I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on my couch, drinking coffee in absolute silence. And for the first time in years, it was mine. Then, at exactly 12:47 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Mom, Ethan, please, we have a problem." I rolled my eyes. Another problem. Another crisis. Another excuse to pull me back into their mess. Then another text. "Mom, it's about the house." My stomach twisted. I exhaled slowly, debating whether to ignore it. But something inside me still cared, some foolish, misplaced loyalty that I hadn't entirely killed yet. So I called. Mom answered before the first ring had even finished. "Ethan, your father and we didn't want to worry you. But things have been tight and, well, we're behind on the mortgage." I pinched the bridge of my nose, forcing myself to stay calm. "And you're just telling me this now?" Mom sighed dramatically, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. "We didn't want to bother you," she insisted. "But now, well, we need your help." "Help? Of course. Help?" I scoffed. "You mean you want me to pay it?" "It's just this month," she rushed to say. "Just to keep us afloat until things settle." I almost laughed. "Kind of funny," I said, leaning back into my chair. "You could afford first-class tickets but not your mortgage?" Silence. Then, a sigh. "Ethan, it wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." My voice was calm, cold, unwavering. I could hear her scrambling, trying to find the right words, trying to twist the narrative like she always did. "Sweetheart, you don't understand what it's like to raise children. To have real responsibilities." "You're right," I cut her off, "because instead of having my own life, I was too busy taking care of yours." Another silence. This one longer, heavier. And then, finally, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, Mom whispered, "Ethan, we need you." That was the truth, wasn't it? They needed me, not because they loved me, not because they cared about me, but because without me, their entire house of cards was collapsing. I took a breath. "I know," I said simply, "but you're going to have to figure it out without me." And then I hung up. The silence lasted 2 days. Then, a text from Jake. "Jake, hope you're happy. Mom and Dad are in trouble because of you. I rolled my eyes. Me, they'll manage. Jake, no, actually they won't. They're 2 months behind on the mortgage. And the bank is already sending notices. But I guess that doesn't matter to you. Does it? I smirked. Me, didn't seem to matter when you were buying first-class tickets. No response. Then, finally, the first real crack in their perfect little world, Sarah had caved. She had dipped into her savings to help them. Something she had never done before, because she had never needed to. Not when I was there to do it for her. Now, with no one else to fall back on, Jake and Emily were forced to take on the financial burden. And it was tearing them apart. I found out through a mutual friend that Jake and Emily had started fighting about money. Apparently, Emily hadn't even known how much my parents relied on me. And now that the weight had shifted to them, it was crushing them. Their perfect little life was cracking. Their easy smiles were fading. And Mom and Dad? They were finally learning what it meant to struggle without me. And I had never felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I was free. No late-night calls begging for money. No guilt-ridden texts asking for just a little help because Jake was struggling. No manipulative speeches about how family takes care of each other right before they reached into my wallet. Silence. Pure, blissful silence. I should have expected it wouldn't last. 3 weeks had passed since I had cut them off. 3 weeks of peace. Of waking up without feeling like I owed someone something. Of knowing every dollar in my bank account belonged to me. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. A message, from an unexpected source. Kelly, hey, Ethan, I don't know if I should be reaching out. But, things are bad at home. I thought you should know. Kelly was one of Sarah's friends. Someone I had only met a handful of times. Why was she messaging me? Me, why are you telling me this? Her reply came fast. Kelly, because I know how much you did for them. And now that you stopped, well, it's all falling apart. I sat there, gripping my phone, feeling an unfamiliar satisfaction bubbling beneath my skin. I knew this would happen. I knew that the moment I walked away, they would sink. But seeing it unfold in real time? That was different. Then, another message. A screenshot. It was from a private group chat Sarah was in with her closest friends. And it was glorious. Sarah, Ethan is such a fool. He's just sitting there watching us suffer like we deserve this. Sarah, he doesn't care about anyone but himself. Sarah, I had to drain my savings just to keep Mom and Dad afloat. And guess what? They're still drowning. Sarah, we can't keep doing this. Mark is pissed. He says this is all their fault for relying on Ethan in the first place. I laughed out loud. Crawling back? She still thought I was the one who needed them. She still believed that at some point, I would break and come running back, begging to take my place as their doormat again. They still didn't understand. I wasn't coming back. A week later, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Ethan. I stiffened. It was my father. I hadn't heard his voice in over a month. What do you want? I asked flatly. He sighed, heavily, dramatically, like this conversation was exhausting him. Son, listen, we need to talk. No, we really don't. There was a pause, a long one. Then his voice dropped into that familiar condescending tone. The one he used when he wanted me to feel small. Enough is enough, he said. You've made your point, but we're your parents, and this is getting ridiculous. I smirked. Ridiculous? I echoed. Like abandoning your son at the airport while you flew first class? A beat of silence. Then his voice sharpened. That's not fair, he snapped. We didn't mean anything by that. Maybe not, I said, but you didn't not mean it. Either. Silence. The longest silence yet. And then, the real reason for his call. Sarah's struggling. Ethan, she needs help. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Oh, so now Sarah needs me? She's drowning. Ethan, Mark's talking about selling the house. The kids don't understand what's happening. Not my problem. Son, my father said, a warning in his tone. No, I cut him off. This is the part where you try to manipulate me again. Where you pretend this is about family and not about the fact that you used me for years and now you're paying for it. Another long silence. Then, finally, his voice turned cold. So that's it? You're just walking away? I smiled. You walked away first, I reminded him. At the airport, remember? More silence. Then, finally, a bitter, clipped, "Fine." And he hung up. That was the last time I ever heard from my father. I expected another round of begging from my mother. Another tearful message from Sarah. But they never came. A month later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Sarah and Mark had sold their house and moved into a smaller one. My parents had downsized, too. For years, they had lived in comfort because I had made sure of it. For years, they had pretended they were better than me, acted as though I was less than them. And now, they had finally learned what life without me actually felt like. And I was free, not just from their financial burden, but from them. I didn't owe them my success. I didn't owe them my money. And I didn't owe them my forgiveness. So I took a deep breath, blocked their numbers, and never looked back. For the first time in my life, I was truly, completely, unapologetically living for myself. And it felt incredible. It took me a while to realize that true freedom isn't just about leaving, it's about never feeling the pull to return. For years, my life had revolved around fixing their problems, cleaning up their messes, and keeping their world intact at the cost of my own. Every paycheck I earned, every decision I made, every trip I canceled, it was always because of them. And then, I finally walked away. The first week was strange. The silence was almost deafening. An eerie void where chaos used to be. No urgent texts, no guilt-laden phone calls, no desperate last-minute requests to cover bills or bail someone out. At first, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Would they show up at my door? Would Sarah suddenly forgive me and try to manipulate her way back into my good graces? Would my mom finally break and admit everything they had done? But none of that happened. Because, for the first time, they were too busy drowning in their own problems. And I was too busy enjoying my life to care. With no one else's needs to prioritize. My paycheck finally belonged to me. The money that had once vanished into Sarah's emergencies and my parents' reckless spending now sat untouched in my account. And for the first time, I let myself spend it on me. I bought new furniture, redecorated my apartment, even splurged on the high-end espresso machine I had been eyeing for months. Small things, sure, but each one felt like a rebellion against the life I used to live. And then I booked another trip. Japan had been my first taste of freedom, but now I wanted more. I boarded a plane to Greece, walking onto that flight without a single ounce of guilt, without a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispering that I was being selfish. I stood on the cliffs of Santorini, watched the sunset over the Aegean Sea, and realized something so simple, yet so powerful. I didn't miss them, not my parents, not Sarah, not the life I had left behind. Because what was there to miss? Being used? Being manipulated? Being the family's ATM until I had nothing left for myself? No, I didn't miss that. I only regretted not walking away sooner. A month later, I heard through a mutual friend that Sarah and Mark had officially sold their house and moved into a smaller one. Apparently, Mark hadn't even known how much of their financial security had been built on my money. And when it was suddenly gone, their perfect life started falling apart. The vacations, the expensive dinners, the shopping sprees, it all stopped. And my parents? They had to downsize too, selling their home for something more manageable. The reality of their choices had finally caught up with them. For years, they had taken me for granted. For years, they had made me feel like I wasn't part of the family unless I was useful to them. And now they were learning what life was like without me. And I had never felt lighter. Closing the door forever. Months passed. And then, one day, I sat down, took a deep breath, and blocked their numbers. Not just ignored them, not just muted them, completely erased them from my life. Because I owed them nothing. Not my time, not my energy, and definitely not my forgiveness. They had made their choices. And I had made mine. To live, for me, and never look back.